Hi everybody, Miss Lerner here. I'm here to discuss with you testing and individual differences. We're going to go through these modules online to try to make up for some lost time. Okay, so in the first module, we'll talk about intelligence itself. What is it? What, depending on who you are, how do you define it? And then, just different kinds of examples of the types of intelligence. So what does it mean to be intelligent? Let me just try to move myself somewhere where I'm not blocking the screen. Um, Traditionally, when we think about intelligence, we think about the things that are measured on IQ tests, but that's a very narrow definition of intelligence. Okay? It's culturally bound. It doesn't have a quality that can be, measured universally. Okay. So school smarts is only one component of intelligence, and looking at intelligence in a fixed manner rather than a manner that has a growth mindset can be really devastational to people, thinking that you're born a certain way, either smart or not smart. In reality, intelligence is just as malleable as any other trait. So, how can we more broadly define intelligence? I guess real intelligence has a stake in learning from your experience and solving problems. Okay, using previous knowledge to adapt to new situations. So it's more than book smarts again. Okay, and we're going to go into a variety of these conceptions of intelligence. Okay, so there is this thing called factor analysis. Factor analysis is a statistical procedure that we try to see what kinds of factors or traits are clustered together. Okay, um, and when we look at intelligence, we try to see the subtypes of intelligence that cluster together to form what we call Spearman's G. So originally, the idea of intelligence was that there was one generalized intelligence. Okay, and that was Spearman's idea. Charles Spearman thought he looked at things like people's math ability and linguistic ability and science ability, and he saw that when people tended to be good in one of these aspects, they tended to be good in the other. Okay, and these all clustered together to what he considered a G factor. Okay, um, he was really the only one that believed that intelligence was one factor. All the other intelligence theorists believe that intelligence derives from multiple things, or includes multiple types. Um, so it's really important for you to understand that he was kind of the OG, the original, and the rest of the theorists kind of broke away from him. Okay. So there was G, although Spearman did investigate these specific factors and where they kind of overlapped. He really was more concentrated on, as I said, this generalized intelligence. In terms of a mnemonic, um, ain't nothing but a G thing. You're such a G, Spearman. Okay, spearmint gum. These are ways that you can remember it. The first critic of Charles Spearman was L.L. Thurstone, and he came up with the primary abilities. Um, and really, he identified 7 major clusters of abilities, whether there be verbal comprehension, spatial ability, inductive reasoning, memory. You wouldn't need to know the specifics, but it was much more complex than G. Okay. The idea of a G factor was controversial back then, and it's really controversial now. But that being said, there are arguments in support of the existence of G. Okay, because as I said, when you look at how these things cluster together, there's this tendency for people who excel in one type of task to excel in multiple types of tasks. Okay, so when people investigated Thurstone's primary abilities, they saw that people were really good at both, let's say, inductive reasoning and memory. It wasn't like one versus the other. So that kind of supports G in a way. Another person who broke away from G was Raymond Cattell. Okay, he said that intelligence is really made up of two types: crystallized intelligence and fluid intelligence. Crystallized intelligence, in my mind's eye, I conceptualize little like nuggets of information, factual information, knowledge acquired, these crystals in your cerebrum. Okay. And those crystals actually they grow over time. They don't change. Okay. Fluid intelligence is a little bit different. Fluid intelligence is the ability to reason and solve complex problems and um, you know, be creative, look at things in a different way. I conceptualize that as like fluid flowing through and trying to kind of go through the brain and basically attacking problems and difficulties. Um, as you age, and this is a very, very common AP question, as you age, crystallized intelligence is going to increase, okay? Like your knowledge of facts, vocabulary, the world. Whereas fluid intelligence, your ability to like reason, solve problems, puzzles, be creative, think outside of the box is going to decrease. Think of the fluid just like spilling out and being done. All right, this handsome man is Robert Sternberg. He came up with the triarchic theory, which just means three. This is the first time we will be introduced to Robert Sternberg. He will come back in it when we talk about love later on. But you can remember that Sternberg is the pack man. Okay, he is the pack man. He believed there are three types of intelligence: practical, analytical, and creative. Okay, and in his research, he found that really, like in contrast to ideas about G, people tended to be better in one type of these intelligence than another. Um, he also believed that intelligence was trainable, and a lot of research, as I said, really does support that in the modern era. And that intelligence, of course, is culture bound. What is considered to be intelligent in one culture is not necessarily intelligent in another. Let's go through each of these. Okay. Practical intelligence is just what it seems. It's street smarts. Okay. So, are you able to live with the logical demands of the world, get yourself out of tricky situations, deal with the demands of life? Analytical intelligence is typically what we usually assess on like an IQ test. We call it logical reasoning. It's what we learn in school, vocab, math ability, really what we usually frame as smarts. And lastly, creative intelligence is going to involve insight and insight learning, seeing things in a new sort of way. Okay, people are going to overcome functional fixedness, seeing like an object for its only one purpose, and seeing new connections in the world. Okay. So Howard Gardner probably has the most types of intelligence. His theory used to have a lot of backing. It was very, like when I started teaching, it was very much in vogue to teach to multiple intelligences. This is what he came up with, a theory of multiple intelligences. He found, IQ testing far too limited, and he looked at least 7 and primarily 8 types of intelligence. Okay, so you can see this graphic. Some things that you might not usually think of as intelligence that he pinpointed: existentialist intelligence, like who are we, where are we, what is art, art? Musical intelligence, how musical are you? Naturalist intelligence, are you good with nature? Do you notice patterns in the universe? Are you a good athlete? That would mean that you had good bodily kinesthetic intelligence. That term kinesthetic, that should go back to the kinesthetic sense in sensation and perception, your ability to move your body in relationship to each other, to itself. Okay, so yeah, as I said, he had 8. So I guess arguably had the greatest number of intelligences in his theory. Okay, just going through these a little bit more in depth, or just each one, each one at all. Musical intelligence is what it sounds like: understanding pitch, rhythm, tempo, being able to play an instrument. Visual spatial, if you're being a good artist, thinking about images, pictures. Logical mathematical, thinking abstractly and being good at math, obviously. Bodily kinesthetic, being a good athlete, being a good dancer, handling your body well, movement. Interpersonal, working with others socially and emotionally. So interpersonal, be like, if you are taking this class because you want to be a clinical psychologist, theoretically you're going to score high on interpersonal intelligence. Verbal linguistic, are you really good with wordplay? Do you understand nuances of word meanings? Do you read a lot? Do you write a great deal? Okay. The other two that were not there, and are somewhat controversial. There's intrapersonal intelligence, okay, which is the ability to know oneself, your strengths, your weaknesses, etc. There's going to be naturalist intelligence, as I said, your ability to navigate through the environment, and existentialist intelligence. The last two are a little bit controversial. I mean, his whole theory has somewhat been debunked, but that being said, it is important for us to know about it. So savant syndrome is something that supports something like multiple intelligences, okay? Because someone with like a limited mental ability, like an intellectual disability, and would be classified with an IQ of under 70, has an exceptionally good talent at something, is really good at one thing, like mathematical ability or drawing from memory. Okay. Savant syndrome can be prevalent in people with autism. It's not as common as movies would like to suggest. Okay, but that being said, it does exist. A really burgeoning field in psychology is what is called grit, okay, and being gritty. We do see that grit tends to be much more important than other um, intelligence markers in being successful. It's your sheer passion and perseverance in pursuit of goals that you're not going to get knocked down no matter what. Okay, that you are willing to change the way you act, think in order to overcome obstacles. Okay, so success is a combination of talent and grit. Okay, so those people who are the most quote unquote successful tend to be conscientious. They also tend to be very stubborn and willing to work in the face of adversity. And then there's this thing called emotional intelligence. Emotional intelligence is far more important than your IQ score in terms of predicting future success. Okay? It's the ability to perceive, understand, manage, and use emotions. A lot of psychologists have looked at emotional intelligence. Daniel Goleman, which you can remember Goleman, like it's a goal man to have good emotional intelligence. He was going to work with children in what we call the marshmallow test. And the marshmallow test basically involved placing a marshmallow in front of a young child and giving them the instructions that they could eat one marshmallow now, or if they waited till the researcher came back in 5 minutes, then they could have two. Okay, so really it was a test of delayed gratification. And you've probably seen things like this on the internet. In reality, that delay of gratification correlates tremendously with emotional intelligence. Being able to delay gratification, when we looked at these kids later on longitudinally in life, they were going to be much more successful if they were willing to wait for the second marshmallow than if they just went to town on the first. Okay, so obviously, emotional intelligence isn't just as simple as understanding emotions in general. Okay, of course there is the just perceiving emotions, and then you have to predict them, and you have to manage them and use them in a way that is going to be worthwhile to you. Okay. As I said, having a high EQ, emotional quotient, which is like kind of the counterpart of IQ, tend to be much more successful in relationships, their careers, and as parents. They tend to live longer, they tend to be happier, and just generally mentally and psychologically healthier. Okay, so just kind of as a closure, looking at these intelligence theories, because this is one of the things that is most tested on the AP exam. Okay, you have the original Spearman, okay, general intelligence. Then you have Thurstone, who came out as a criticism for Spearman. Okay, it's the 7 factors. Gardner has the most multiple intelligence, at least 8 or 9. Sternberg has the triarchic theory of intelligence with the 3. Emotional intelligence has the 4 components of predicting, managing, using, understanding emotions. And not on this chart, but will come into play later on in a later module, Cattell's crystallized and fluid intelligence. Okay, so now that we kind of have a better understanding of what intelligence is or might be, let's talk about the assessment of intelligence. How do we assess intelligence, know that someone is intelligent? Okay, well, generally speaking, you take an IQ test, you take an intelligence test. Okay, so you are going to assess your mental ability, aptitudes, and abilities are going to be assessed by comparing, contrasting to a distribution of other scores. And really, there are going to be 2 ways to classify intelligence tests: achievement tests or aptitude tests. Achievement tests are going to reflect what you've already learned. Okay, the AP test is a great achievement test if it's made correctly. Okay, what an aptitude is going to reflect a prediction for how you will do in the future. Okay, so as I said, the AP exam, chapter or unit tests in your courses, final exams in college, all achievement tests. Have you learned what you were supposed to learn? Okay, an aptitude test is going to measure something you have not done yet, predict how well you do in the future. In theory, like the driving component of a driver's test is going to be an aptitude test for how well you will drive on the road later on if it's designed correctly. Other career tests. Theoretically, the SAT, it was designed as an aptitude test. That being said, many people argue that it is an achievement test. Okay, then we get to really the controversies surrounding intelligence, and you guys are aware of that based upon your viewing of the crash courses. There was, Charles Darwin's cousin, Francis Galton, and he was pretty much obsessed with measuring various human traits, whether it be, the size of your skull or the number of times you could do anything. And he was really, really biased along racial lines. Okay, so he measured reaction time, what he considered sensory acuity, muscular power, bodily proportions. And, with all of these things, he made this argument that it was pretty much nature that was going to derive intelligence rather than nurture. Okay. And despite his racist interpretation of intelligence and the fact that casts him into a very dishonorable light and it's disgusting, okay, his longstanding contribution is that term, nature and nurture, as well as like the statistical techniques that he used. Okay. Galton was so controversial that even his cousin Darwin didn't like him. So intelligence testing has a really, really, long and windy past. it's steeped in controversy because we have this kind of racist underbelly. But in reality, when we started designing tests to measure intelligence, it was done with good intentions. Okay. Alfred Binet was a French psychologist that was commissioned by the French government to design intelligence tests to administer to French school children. He wanted to administer these tests just so they could, provide help for students who might need it to identify that that need. Okay, because as schools became mandated, they needed some testing to kind of identify needy students. Okay, so Alfred Binet and his student Theodore Simon, okay, they in their lab they saw that all children kind of followed the same course of development, but there's going to be kind of a continuum of the rapidness of their development. And they came up with this idea of mental age, which is the level of a performance that's typically associated with chronological age. That a kid who was bright at 5 chronologically could perform like someone who was 10 mentally. Okay. So really a dull child is going to score like a younger child, and a bright child is going to score like an older child. That's a key kind of element. Okay. So this was this is the turn of the century. This is like 1908. Okay, this is happening abroad. Again, this is really, really starting with good intentions. The road to hell is paved with good intentions. Okay. However, in 1916, we kind of brought the IQ test, the Binet-Simon intelligence scale, the original, to America, and Lewis Terman took it and he designed what we call the Stanford-Binet intelligence scale. Okay, Stanford after the school that he was working at, and what really happened at that point was that it was used to give to soldiers in the army. It was used to give to immigrants at school when school again became mandatory. And as you can imagine, if I'm taking an IQ test in my non-native language in a country that I've never been, obviously I'm not going to score well. Okay, so in some cases, it was not a valid interpretation of intelligence, and that was going to be very problematic because it was going to separate people not according to their true intelligence, but according to these other types of extraneous variables. Okay, so just to clarify again, your mental age is the average age in which an individual achieves a certain score, whereas your chronological age is the number of years that you've lived on this planet. Okay. To make things a little bit clearer, William Stern was a psychologist who came up with the IQ rather than just differentiating, saying, well, this is your mental age, act your mental age. Okay. He wanted to make it more quantifiable. Okay. So what he did was he came up with a formula to derive the IQ. Okay. It's a numerical score on a test, which is computed by dividing your mental age by your chronological age times 100. Okay, so you are taking the age at which you kind of perform at divided by the number of years you've been alive times 100. Okay. As you can imagine, if you perform at the same level as your mental age, and if you're 5 and you perform as a 5-year-old's ability level times 100, you're going to get an average IQ score, 100. If you perform better and you perform at a higher mental age than your chronological age, you're going to get an above average score. And if you perform lower than your chronological age in your mental age, it's going to be less. Okay, it's going to be less than 100. Okay, so as you can imagine, again, it doesn't take a math magician to figure out that there was going to be limits to this kind of calculation. Works really well for children, but not for adults, right? I mean, like I'm a certain number of years old, right? Let's just say let's go back and say I'm, when I'm 30. Okay, so being 30, right? Is it that, when I'm 30 that I'm going to score like a 45-year-old? No. Okay, at some point your IQ is actually going to decrease because it's not like it appreciates as the chronological years go on. For this reason, most intelligence tests currently, including the Stanford-Binet, don't compute an IQ in this manner. We still use the Stanford-Binet intelligence scale. It is not the most widely used test because it is very, very complicated to implement and lengthy and costly. Okay. So I kind of hinted at this, and your book talks about it in detail, but the early intelligence tests were going to be flawed. Okay. They were going to, label immigrants as dumb and unintelligent. Okay. Lewis Terman himself came to appreciate that, mental abilities were going to reflect not only just like this inherent natural ability, but your native language, your familiarity with the culture, with the test, their education, and so forth. Okay. The most common intelligence test that is used in today's world is the Wechsler Adult Intelligence Scale. Okay, it's the WAIS for short, and the WISC for children. Chances are I would be astounded to find out that you hadn't had an IQ test in your schooling. You probably don't remember because it was an earlier year. Okay, but if you were to go into your file in guidance, you would probably have a WISC score there attached with your performance. Okay, so why do we use this? Well, because it has, a good kind of composite view of different types of intelligence. You got this verbal IQ and performance IQ, which, is separated into, your knowledge of vocabulary and comprehension, and your working memory, and how you can complete pictures and reason and work with digits. So this is going to be really, really useful in pinpointing strengths and weaknesses in someone's, performance. Someone may have a tremendous verbal IQ and a very weak performance IQ in terms of processing speed. Okay. So for that reason, the WAIS and the WISC, they're going to be really useful for people who have educational difficulties, who may have, an IEP at 504, to pinpoint the types of accommodations that these students might need in the classroom. So what makes a good test? What does a good test have to be? Okay. 3 things: standardized, reliable, valid. Okay. Standardized scores are compared and contrasted to a pre-tested sample. Okay, that's it. Okay, it's just you need to put it in some sort of context. Reliable scores mean that you get the same scores on the test, no matter how many times you take it, and who takes it. Okay, and valid tests is probably what we strive for, but really, really struggle with. The test is going to measure or predict what it's supposed to measure or predict. Okay, so a test can be reliable and not valid. Okay, so if you were taking a test in psychology, but all the questions were math questions, you probably, and it was a well-built math test, it would be reliable. You would probably perform a decently on that test. However, that being said, it would not be a valid representation of your psychological knowledge or abilities. Okay, blast from the past. We got the normal curve back in action. Okay, so The normal curve, remember, is this symmetrical bell-shaped curve. We learned about it in the first unit when we were talking about research methods. Okay. A normal curve is going to, really describe many physical and psychological attributes. And it's very useful specifically in psychology to describe intelligence. Okay, so, most scores are going to fall near the average and fewer are falling to the extremes. Okay, I can be reasonably certain on the Wechsler Adult Intelligence Scale that 68% of the population is going to fall between an IQ of 85 and 115. Okay, how do I know that? Because the mean of the Wechsler Adult Intelligence Scale is 100 and the standard deviation is 15. We know that. Okay, that's a given number. Okay, as you move out, we look at, 95% is going to be between 70 and 130. And then we got 99%, even 99.7% between 55 and 145. Once you get into those exceptional categories under 55 or above 145, it's very, very rare. Okay. Remember that in a bell curve or a normal distribution, the mean, median, and mode are the same and in the center. They are equal. Okay. So the 68, 95, 99 rule. Okay. 68, 1 standard deviation, 95, 2 standard deviations, and 99, 3 standard deviations. Okay. A 6 and an 8-year-old take a joyride on I-95 going 99 miles per hour and get pulled over. That's just how I remember it. Hit me with a better mnemonic, please. Okay, so a score generally just indicates, are you average, above average, or below average in these Stanford Binet and Wechsler scales. Okay, when we talk about exception, when we talk about genius and severe intellectual disability, we're talking about people who are above 130 and below 70. Because just typically speaking, we know that like a performance higher than all but 2.5% of society is going to be 130, okay? And a performance lower than 97.5% is going to be 70. We're going to practice some problems with this just to revisit it. Now, just so you know, the Wechsler scales and the Stanford Binet scales are re-standardized, okay? Because there's something interesting that is happening, okay? There's a worldwide phenomenon that's known as the Flynn effect, which is after just the researcher's name who noticed it, okay? What we find is that intelligence test performance has improved over time. It keeps going up. Okay, the average person's intelligence test score in 1920 was, by today's standard, a 76. Okay, so does that mean that we're actually getting smarter? Probably not. Okay, there are going to be various confounding variables that are going to, affect your intelligence test performance. Things like better nutrition. Okay, better nutrition. It's not that you're smarter, your brain is working better, okay? Things like having less people in a family so parents can support, you can support each child and make them, provide them with more education. In 1920, there were a lot of kids in each family, okay? Things like familiarity with testing, okay? Not that many tests were taken back in 1920. Now you're, bombarded with tests. So we have to think about other sorts of possibilities rather than the fact that we're just getting smarter. Okay, so reliability is going to be measured in 3 ways. Okay, we have split half, alternative form, and test retest. Okay, so split half, if I take a test in 2 and I split it in half, the 2 halves should match pretty well. Okay. Back in the day when I was first teaching AP psychology, I would give, I still give a number of versions of tests, but I would give one test that was kind of in the order of the chapter and the other test which was scattered, okay? And what I found was that it wasn't reliable. People who had the test in the order of the chapter actually performed a lot better than those where it was just scattered. Okay, because we kind of use the order of the chapter as a retrieval cue in our brain to understand what is happening. So I had to change the tests to all be scattered. Okay, alternative form. When we had the AP exam, this past spring, there were 20 different versions of FRQs at least. Okay, and that just means that varying versions are tested and compared. We get the same type of result. Okay. And then test retest. The same test is re-administered and the results are compared. Okay? The higher the correlation between the two scores, the higher the test reliability. If I have a reliable friend, it means I can depend on them to show up. If I have a reliable test, it means that I can depend on it to have the same results. Okay. Then we have validity. Okay. Validity is the extent to which a test measures or predicts what it's supposed to. Right. So, I hope that I can design tests that are valid for the information that we are learning in class or virtually. Okay. That's the goal, right? You don't want to have a test on things you haven't learned in class. Okay. That being said, again, this is going to kind of harken back to an achievement test versus aptitude testing. Okay. There are two types of validity: content validity and predictive validity. Content validity is going to describe the extent to which a test is going to reflect the behavior of interest. Okay, so the AP test we hope has good content validity for the information in the course. Okay, predictive validity is going to deal with aptitude testing. Okay, so the extent to which a test predicts future behavior. So, then I've never, let's say, played the violin before. I take an aptitude test on playing the violin, and it has good predictive validity because I score high and then I'm really good at playing the violin. Okay, academic aptitude tests are going to predict future school success. Okay, that's why we have the SAT. In theory, it's supposed to predict future school success, but I'm kind of on the fence about that. The only thing that the SAT really correlates well with is going to be your IQ score. Okay. And then lastly, module 62, the dynamics of intelligence. Okay. We're going to talk about return back to crystallized and fluid intelligence and different types of studies and the extremes of intelligence. Okay. So the long-held belief regarding aging and intelligence was that, over time your intelligence dropped. Okay. We know now that that's not necessarily the case. That dismal view kind of was unchanged for many decades, but now we know that it was due to flawed kind of study techniques. Okay. So we know that generally speaking, when we talk about correlational studies, there's various types of timing you can pursue in correlational studies. You can do a cross-sectional study, a longitudinal study, or a cohort sequential study. Okay. And if you study the same cohort, generally speaking, longitudinally, okay, they find that intelligence remains stable. Okay. On some tests, scores even increase, but generally speaking, the IQ that you have on an intelligence test at 4 is going to be the IQ you have at 40 and the IQ you have at 80. All right, so the difference between crystallized and fluid intelligence. Crystallized intelligence, knowledge, verbal skills, facts, declarative memory. Okay. Fluid intelligence, that's going to be our ability to reason, okay, abstractly, to process information. And it's going to decrease with age, especially during late adulthood. Again, fluid. Think of all of the fluid pouring out of your brain. Okay, so I was referring to the cross-sectional research method before. Okay, cross-sectional research is going to compare people at different ages at the same point of time. So I take a 5-year-old, a 10-year-old, a 15-year-old, a 20-year-old, a 25-year-old, a 30-year-old, and I give them all IQ tests at one time, and then I compare and contrast their scores to see if intelligence increases or decreases over time. Okay, at one point in time. As you can see here in this graph, the cross-sectional method of testing intelligence and intelligence scores suggests decline throughout life. Okay, when in reality, that probably is not the case. There's so many confounding variables that can explain why that looks the way it does. Okay, if you put me in the same IQ pool as, Stephen Hawking, rest his soul, okay? He's older than me, but his IQ score is much, much higher. So it's going to look like the intelligence is increasing with age, when in reality, it's just due to confounding variables to begin with, or initial intelligence to begin with. Okay, remember to minimize the impact of confounding variables in a study. We are going to use random assignment. Okay. A longitudinal study is much more effective in terms of validity. Okay. You're going to study and restudy the same people across the lifespan. So instead of different people at one point in time, you're going to study me at 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, all up to 80. You can give me IQ tests overall and see what happens. Okay. The longitudinal method is going to suggest more stability of intelligence over time, which makes sense. Okay, it makes sense. Okay, why? Because we have these considerations. Like, if I'm comparing an 80-year-old and an 8-year-old, we're comparing different eras, okay, of time. So you're comparing, less educated people with more educated people. You're comparing people raised in large families with smaller families. You're comparing less affluent families with more affluent families. You're comparing people, like a generation that is very tested with one that is not tested. Okay, so that's really going to impact the results and give you skewed results. Okay, now that being said, a longitudinal study can also be problematic. Okay, people who survive to the end of the study might be the healthiest and the brightest. Okay, likewise, longitudinal studies are expensive. They cost a lot of money, and the people who drop out of the study are going to differ in, very, very important ways than people who stay in. So the people who drop out or like, I don't want this study anymore, well, they could, very well just be too, unintelligent to remember there was a study to begin with, for instance. Okay. Probably the most common question on the AP exam about intelligence. What happens to intelligence over age, over the course of one's life? Okay. As you age, you're losing your recall memory, your processing speed, your ability to think creatively, fluid intelligence. Okay. Crystallized intelligence, like vocab and knowledge, is increasing. Okay. You know what? When you're an aging adult, though, you're much more chill. Okay, your social reasoning increases, your ability to understand and empathize with other people. So aging adults, they might be really bad with processing and thinking of the solution of logic problems, but their decisions tend to be less distorted by negative emotions. Okay, remember, crystallized, think of the nuggets, the crystals, they grow in time. Okay, fluid, think of this reasoning, coursing through a puzzle. It's going to decline over time. Okay, so what does intelligence look like over a lifetime? As I said, it's relatively stable. Okay, in like the probably the most well-known longitudinal study of intelligence, it was a Scottish study. We looked at you know kids' intelligence over time to see if working class children would benefit from further education. Okay, so the 11-year-olds, obviously, and then there were the 542 80-year-olds that survived. The correlation between the two sets of scores, 70 years correlation, was very, 70 years past, rather, was very striking. Okay, so we think this intelligence is one of the most stable traits over the course of one's lifetime. Okay, without, grit and work and, just general drive. Right. So let's look at this question. Hal scored at 89 on an intelligence test when he was 16. Now at age 56, he's interested in what his score would be as an adult. The score he is most likely to earn on the new test would be, well, which score is most similar to 89? You said C. I see you. It's 92. All right. So then we have the extremes. Okay. Not just genius, but intellectual disability. Okay, so we characterize intellectual disability by an intelligence score of 70 or below. Okay, we used to call it mental retardation. We no longer use that word, and I hate the R word. Do not ever use it around me. Do not ever use it in life in general because it has a very negative connotation and is not appropriate. Okay, so you have this low IQ score of 70 or below, and then you have some sort of obstacle to developing independence, whether it's conceptual, social, or practical. One type of mild to severe intellectual disability that also has physical attributes is Down syndrome. Down syndrome is caused by an extra copy of chromosome 21. Okay. Down syndrome children, adolescents, adults tend to be extremely happy, energetic, engaging, and pretty much if you talk to someone who has someone in their life with Down syndrome, they say that they have taught them more than anyone else about life. Giftedness is the other extreme. Okay, that is going to be an IQ of 130. Okay, technically speaking, gifted children are allowed modifications as well, according to the Elementary and Secondary Education Act. Being identified as a gifted child, though, can lead to separating learners and can lead to, kids who are kind of pushed along, who should be labeled as gifted, never getting labeled as such. Being labeled as gifted creates a self-fulfilling prophecy, in which gifted children think that they are great and teachers think they are great, and then they feed into that and give them more opportunities and more support to become great. And ungifted children do not get that. Okay, so in the next set of modules, we will refer to self-fulfilling prophecy. It's truly important to look at every child as if they are capable of success. All right, so that's the majority of the chapter. I hope you enjoyed and I hope you understand. See you later. Peace.